The ignition of my Audi cut out, plunging the cabin into a sudden, ringing silence. I sat there for a moment in the driveway, gripping the leather steering wheel, my knuckles white against the dark interior. Rain drummed a rhythmic, melancholy beat against the sunroof, blurring the view of the two-story colonial house that loomed in front of me. From the outside, it was the picture of suburban success. Freshly painted shutters in a tasteful slate gray, a manicured lawn that defied the winter chill, and the warm, inviting glow of amber light spilling from the living room bay window. It was a lie, of course. Or rather, it was a stage set, and I was the one paying for the electricity to light it, the paint to coat it, and the mortgage to keep it standing. I checked my watch. 7:45 p.m. I had stayed at the office an extra 2 hours, not because I had work. I had finished my quarterly projections by noon, but because the fluorescent hum of the empty office was more comforting than the air inside that house. Showtime, I whispered to no one. I grabbed my briefcase, a heavy leather satchel that contained a laptop worth more than Nancy's car, and stepped out into the drizzle. The cold air bit at my cheeks, a sharp contrast to the climate-controlled sanctuary of my car. I walked up the driveway, noticing a crack in the pavement near the garage. I made a mental note to call the contractor tomorrow. Another check to write. Another problem to silently solve. The key turned in the lock with a heavy clunk, and I pushed the door open. Immediately, the smell of roasted garlic and rosemary hit me, a scent that should have signified home and comfort, but instead triggered a tightness in my chest. The television was blaring from the living room, the laugh track of a sitcom echoing off the hardwood floors. I wiped my shoes on the mat carefully. Nancy had eyes like a hawk for dirt, and she treated a speck of mud in the foyer as a personal assault on her character. "Is that him?" Nancy's voice drifted from the kitchen. It wasn't a question directed at me. It was an accusation directed at the house at large. "It's me," I called out, keeping my voice flat, neutral. I hung my coat in the closet, brushing off the raindrops. My suit jacket was slightly damp, but I didn't take it off. It felt like armor. I walked into the kitchen. It was pristine, featuring granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that I had paid off 3 months ago. Nancy stood by the stove, stirring a pot of sauce with a vigor that suggested she was trying to hurt it. She didn't look up. My father, Robert, sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through his phone, a glass of red wine near his elbow. "You're late," Nancy said to the pot of sauce. "Work ran long," I lied. "End of the year crunch," Nancy scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound. She turned then, wiping her hands on a floral dish towel. Her eyes swept over me, missing the bespoke tailoring of my suit and seeing only an intruder in her nest. "Work, please. Sitting in front of a computer screen all day playing with spreadsheets isn't manual labor, Alex. You wouldn't know real work if it hit you in the face." I walked over to the fridge to grab a bottle of water. "It pays the bills, Nancy." "Does it?" she snapped. "Because from where I'm standing, you're just living the high life while your father breaks his back. We're barely keeping our heads above water with the heating costs this winter, and you're strolling in at 8 o'clock expecting dinner." I paused, my hand on the cold metal handle of the refrigerator. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My father had retired 4 years ago, a decision made possible only because I had agreed to cover the gap between his pension and their lifestyle. He wasn't breaking his back. He was breaking his high score on solitaire. I looked at my father. He kept his eyes glued to his phone, his thumb rhythmically swiping up. He knew. He knew I had transferred $3,000 into their joint account 2 days ago, specifically for the oil bill and the property taxes. He knew, and he said nothing. "I don't expect dinner," I said quietly, taking the water. "I ate at the office." "Of course you did," Nancy muttered, turning back to the stove. "Must be nice to have catered meals while we scrape by on pasta. Again." "The pasta smells great, Nancy," my father said, finally speaking up. His voice was placating, soft. He looked at me then, a fleeting, nervous glance that skittered away the moment our eyes met. "Hello, Alex." "Hi, Dad." I leaned against the counter, taking a sip of water. "I shouldn't have engaged. I should have gone straight upstairs to my room, the only space in the house that felt remotely like mine, though Nancy frequently threatened to turn it into a craft room. But something about the holiday tension was making the air brittle, and I felt a perverse need to test the weight of the silence. "Did you get the notification about the bank transfer?" I asked my father, keeping my voice low so Nancy might not catch the specifics. Robert flinched. He took a long sip of wine. "Oh, yes. Yes, I think I saw something come through. Thanks for the contribution for room and board." "Room and board," Nancy repeated, shaking her head. "If we charged you real market rent for a room in this neighborhood, you'd be on the street. You should be grateful your father has such a big heart. Most parents would have kicked a 24-year-old out long ago. Whatever pittance you chip in barely covers the groceries you eat." I looked at the granite countertop. I remembered the day the contractor installed it. I remembered writing the check for $4,000. I remembered Nancy hugging my father, crying about how he was such a good provider, how he always took care of her. I had stood in the hallway, 18 years old and fresh into my first major contract, holding the invoice in my hand. "I try to do my part," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Your part?" Nancy slammed the wooden spoon down on the counter. "Your part? You walk around here like a ghost, Alex. You don't talk to us, you don't help with the yard. You lock yourself in that room with your little video games. You're a drain on this family's energy. It is not just about money, though God knows you could do more. It is about presence. It's about being a family member." "I work 60 hours a week," I said, my voice hardening slightly. "And what do you have to show for it?" she challenged, gesturing at me with a sauce-stained hand. "No girlfriend, no apartment of your own. Just a fancy car you probably leased to look important and a closet full of suits. You're stagnant, Alex. You're failing to launch." I looked at my father again. "Say something." I willed him. "Tell her I paid off your credit card debt last month. Tell her I'm the reason you're driving that Lincoln in the driveway. Just once defend me." Robert cleared his throat. The room went silent, waiting. "Nancy's just stressed about the Christmas party, Alex," he said, staring into his wine glass. "You know how she gets. She just wants everything to be perfect. Maybe you could try to be a little more helpful around the house? Take out the trash without being asked?" The betrayal wasn't sharp anymore. It was a dull, familiar ache, like an old injury that flared up in the rain. He was throwing me to the wolves to keep the den quiet. "Right," I said. "The trash. I'll get right on that." "Don't use that tone with him," Nancy hissed. "He provides a roof over your head. Show some respect." "I'm going upstairs," I said, pushing off the counter. "Run away," Nancy called after me. "That's all you're good at. But don't think you can hide during the dinner on Sunday. The whole family is coming, and I won't have you sulking in your cave embarrassing us." I didn't answer. I walked out of the kitchen, through the foyer, and up the stairs. The carpet was thick and soft under my feet. Plush beige wool replaced last year. Another check, another silence. My room was at the end of the hall. I stepped inside and closed the door, turning the lock. It was the only lock in the house I was allowed to use. The room was sparse, almost clinical. A high-end ergonomic chair, a wide desk with 3 monitors, a server rack humming quietly in the corner, and a bed that was made with military precision. I exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to deflate my entire posture. I loosened my tie and tossed my jacket onto the bed. Sitting down at my desk, I woke the monitors. The screens bathed the dark room in a cool blue glow. I pulled up my banking portal. The numbers were stark, absolute. They didn't lie, and they didn't gaslight. Transfer to Robert J. Miller, $3,000, Deck 22. Mortgage payment, $2,450, Deck 15. Utility provider, $420, Deck 10. I scrolled down, looking at the history, month after month, year after year. Since I was 20, when my startup got acquired and I landed the consultant gig, I had been funneling nearly 70% of my income into this house. Why? I asked myself that question every night. I minimized the banking window and opened a folder titled Mom. A scanned photo appeared on the screen. A woman with kind eyes and a tired smile standing in the garden of this very house, holding a trowel. She had loved this place. She had died in the master bedroom down the hall. Before the end, she had made me promise to look after Dad. "He's not strong like you, Alex," she had whispered, her hand frail in mine. "He falls apart. Promise me you won't let him lose the house." I had promised, and I had built a golden cage around him, padding the bars with cash so he wouldn't feel the cold wind of reality. But then Nancy had arrived, swooping in 6 months after the funeral, and my father had eagerly handed her the keys to his life, and by extension, mine. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. The promise felt like a noose tonight. A knock at the door made me stiffen. "Alex!" It was my father. His voice was muffled through the wood. I didn't answer immediately. I stared at the waveform on my screensaver. "Alex, open up for a minute." I stood up and unlocked the door, opening it a crack. Robert stood there, looking uncomfortable. He was holding an envelope. "What is it, Dad?" He shifted his weight. "Nancy's. She's just high-strung. You know she wants the Christmas dinner to go well. Her sister is coming, and you know how competitive they are." "I know. Look." He lowered his voice, glancing down the hallway toward the stairs to ensure the coast was clear. "I wanted to ask for the party. The catering bill came in a little higher than expected, and I wanted to get Nancy those earrings she was looking at." He held out the envelope. It was an unpaid invoice from a local gourmet deli. I looked at the invoice, then at his face. His eyes were pleading, wet with a pathetic sort of desperation. He wasn't asking me as a father asks a son. He was asking me as a junkie asks a dealer. "I just gave you $3,000, Dad," I whispered. "That was for the bills, the oil, the taxes." I know," he stammered. "But the car needed new tires, and Nancy needed a dress for the church service, and money just goes, Alex. You know how it is." "I do know how it is," I said, "because I earn it." "Just this last time," he said. "For Christmas. Please. I don't want to fight with her about the budget. Not now." He held the paper out further. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the weakness etched into the lines around his mouth. I saw a man who had completely surrendered his dignity for a quiet life. A man who was willing to cannibalize his son's future to feed his wife's ego. And yet, the habit was so ingrained. The need to fix it, to be the one who held the roof up, was a compulsion I couldn't simply switch off. I took the invoice. "Fine." "Thanks, son," he said, visible relief washing over him. He straightened up, attempting to regain some semblance of paternal authority. "And, try to smile more on Sunday? For Nancy? She thinks you're miserable." "I'll work on it," I said. "Good man." He patted my shoulder, a weak, fluttering tap, and turned to walk away. "Dinner will be ready in 10, if you want any." I closed the door and locked it again. I walked back to my desk and tossed the invoice onto the keyboard. $450 for deli platters. I sat there in the blue glow, the hum of the computer filling the silence. I logged back into the bank account. I paid the invoice. The confirmation screen flashed green. Payment successful. It was easy. Click a button, solve a problem. But as I sat there, listening to Nancy's voice rising through the floorboards, complaining about the way I had tracked dirt into the foyer, something shifted inside me. It wasn't an explosion. It was a crystallization. I looked around the room. I looked at the bed I had slept in since I was a child. I looked at the walls that held so many memories of my mother, now repainted in colors Nancy had chosen. "Leech," Nancy had called me. "Room and board," my father had said. I picked up my phone and opened the calendar app. Sunday, December 25th, Christmas dinner. I stared at the date. I had a feeling that Sunday was going to be different. I was tired of being the invisible pillar. I was tired of the golden cage. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked street. The reflection in the glass showed a young man in a tailored suit, successful, capable, and utterly alone in his own home. "You want me to move out?" I whispered to the reflection, testing the words. They felt terrifying. They felt electric. Downstairs, I heard a crash, a pot lid dropping, followed by Nancy yelling, Robert, I told you to watch the sauce. I'm coming, honey, I'm coming, my father yelled back, panic in his voice. I turned away from the window. I didn't go downstairs for dinner. I sat in the dark, listening to the rain, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the crushing weight of obligation. I felt the cold, hard clarity of an ending. Sunday was coming, and I had a feeling that after the toast, nothing in this house would ever be the same again. I still remember the sound of the office door closing behind me. Not because it was loud, but because no one looked up. Minutes earlier, I had been sitting across from my boss, hands folded, pretending I wasn't nervous. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't ask if I had questions. We're restructuring, he said, eyes fixed on his screen. Your position is no longer necessary. That was it. No warning, no feedback, no acknowledgement of the years I had given that place. When I returned to my desk, people avoided eye contact, not out of cruelty, but fear. Security handed me a cardboard box. HR told me where to return my badge. Someone wished me good luck in a voice barely audible. I carried the box outside, not because it was heavy, but because of what it meant. For years, I believed effort protected me. That loyalty mattered. That competence guaranteed safety. I was wrong. Standing on the sidewalk with everything I had reduced to cardboard, I didn't know this moment was the quiet beginning of something else. Not revenge, not success, but clarity. The day everything stopped making sense. I didn't go home right away after I was fired. I stood across the street from the office building, holding the cardboard box against my chest, watching people move behind the glass walls as if nothing had happened. Laptops open, coffee cups refilled, meetings continued. The world didn't pause just because mine had cracked. The box was light. Too light for 5 years of work. Inside it were things that now felt strangely meaningless. A framed photo I never remembered bringing in. A notebook filled with ideas that had never been implemented. A company-branded mug with a crack along the handle. I turned the mug slightly, reading the faded slogan printed on it. Building the future together. I almost laughed. The sidewalk was cold beneath my shoes. It was late afternoon, that strange hour when the sun hasn't set yet, but already feels tired. Cars passed. Someone brushed by my shoulder and muttered an apology without stopping. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages. I didn't know why that stung more than the firing itself. I had been loyal. Painfully loyal. I was the employee who stayed late without being asked. The one who answered emails on weekends. The one who didn't complain when credit quietly drifted upward to people with better titles and louder voices. I told myself it was fine. That recognition would come eventually. That patience was a virtue. Standing there with a cardboard box digging into my forearms, patience felt like a mistake. I finally started walking, not toward home, just away. Every step felt heavier than the last, like gravity had quietly doubled when no one was looking. I replayed the meeting again and again in my head, searching for a moment I could have changed, a sentence I should have said differently, a warning sign I should have noticed. There were none. That was the worst part. If I had failed, I could have accepted it. If I had been warned, I could have prepared. But being erased without explanation leaves no place to put the pain. It just floats around inside you looking for somewhere to land. By the time I reached my apartment, the sun was gone. I dropped the box by the door and sank onto the couch without turning on the lights. The room smelled faintly of detergent and stale air. I sat there longer than I meant to, staring at nothing, letting the quiet press in. Eventually, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "How was work today?" I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. For a moment, I considered lying. Saying it was fine, saying everything was normal. Instead, I set the phone face down and stood up. I didn't have the energy to explain myself to anyone, not even people who loved me. I slept poorly that night. Every time I drifted off, my mind dragged me back to that office chair, that neutral tone, that sentence that ended everything. Your position is no longer necessary. Morning came too quickly. I woke with a familiar surge of anxiety, reaching instinctively for my phone to check emails that no longer existed. The realization hit me again, fresh and sharp. I wasn't late. I didn't have anywhere to be. The day stretched in front of me like an unmarked road, and for the first time in years, I had no idea how to walk it. I spent the morning doing nothing, real nothing. Not scrolling, not cleaning, just sitting, letting the hours pass without structure. It felt wrong, almost dangerous, like breaking a rule I had lived by for too long. By noon, the fear crept in. Bills didn't stop just because I'd been fired. Rent didn't care about restructuring. Savings evaporated quickly when you stared at them too long. I opened my laptop and updated my resume. The document looked impressive on paper. Years of experience, measurable results, polished language. I sent it out to half a dozen listings and closed the laptop, telling myself that was enough for today. It didn't feel like enough. The afternoon dragged. I paced the apartment, made coffee I didn't finish, checked my phone too often, still nothing. Late in the evening, another message came in. This time from my former boss. HR will email you regarding next steps. No apology, no acknowledgement, just procedure. Something hardened in me then. Not anger exactly, but a quiet shift. Like a door closing somewhere deep inside. I realized how replaceable I had been. Not just to the company, but to the story I had been telling myself about my worth. For years, I had tied my identity to a role that could be deleted with a sentence. I had believed stability came from being useful to someone else's system. That belief collapsed quickly once it was tested. Over the next few weeks, rejection became routine. Emails that began with "thank you for your interest" and ended with "we've decided to move forward with other candidates." Calls that never came. Interviews that felt promising and then disappeared into silence. Each rejection chipped away at something. Not my confidence, I had already lost most of that, but my certainty. The idea that effort guaranteed outcomes. The idea that there was a clear formula for success. I started waking up later, dressing slower. The structure I had relied on was gone, and I hadn't built anything to replace it. One night, sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by unpaid bills and half-drunk cups of coffee, I caught my reflection in the dark window. I barely recognized the person staring back. That was the moment I understood something important. Losing my job wasn't the real problem. Losing direction was. And until I found a new one, nothing else would matter. I didn't know yet what I was going to build, or if I was capable of building anything at all. But for the first time since the day I was fired, I stopped waiting for someone else to decide my future. When confidence starts to erode. The first month after losing my job felt unreal, not dramatic, not catastrophic, just quiet in a way that made time stretch unnaturally. Days blended together without clear edges. Morning, afternoon, evening, it all became a blur of waiting. Waiting for emails, waiting for calls, waiting for proof that I hadn't made a terrible mistake by believing I was worth more than a disposable position. I told myself I was being productive. I set alarms, made lists, applied to jobs like it was a full-time role. But somewhere beneath the routine, anxiety grew roots. It showed up in small ways at first. I started rereading job listings multiple times before applying, convincing myself I didn't quite meet the requirements. I hesitated before hitting send, imagining rejection before it arrived. When interviews did come, I overprepared, then walked away from them replaying every sentence I'd spoken, convinced I'd said something wrong. Confidence doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes. My savings shrank faster than I expected. Numbers on a screen turned into something physical. Tightness in my chest, shallow breaths, the constant awareness of time passing. I stopped ordering takeout, canceled subscriptions, avoided opening banking apps unless absolutely necessary. Friends asked how things were going. Fine, I said. Still looking, I said. Something will come through, I said. They nodded sympathetically and changed the subject. Not because they didn't care, but because discomfort makes people restless. Unemployment is contagious in a way no one talks about. It reminds people how fragile their own stability really is. Phone calls from my parents became more frequent. At first, they were supportive, or at least they sounded that way. Any updates? Have you heard back from anyone? Maybe this is a sign you should rethink things. The questions piled up. Each one landed heavier than the last. I knew they meant well, but the implication lingered beneath every conversation. You wouldn't be in this situation if you had made better choices. One evening, after another polite but exhausting call, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor. I had followed every rule, gone to school, worked hard, stayed loyal. And still, here I was, counting days, counting dollars, wondering how long I could hold things together before something broke. The nights were the worst. During the day, distraction was possible. At night, there was nowhere to hide. Thoughts looped endlessly, circling the same questions without answers. What if this was it? What if I had peaked already? What if my boss had been right to let me go? I hated that thought most of all, because part of me believed it. I started avoiding mirrors. Not consciously, but I noticed I no longer lingered when passing reflective surfaces. I didn't like the version of myself staring back. Uncertain, tired, stripped of the certainty that had once made me feel solid. One afternoon, I ran into a former coworker at the grocery store. We exchanged pleasantries. He asked how things were going. I gave my usual vague response. Then he hesitated, lowering his voice. I heard about the layoffs, he said. Management said it was necessary. Necessary. The word followed me down the aisles long after we parted ways. Was I really that easy to remove? That night, I opened my old work files, presentations I had built, strategies that had driven growth, emails praising my performance, carefully worded, always just shy of recognition. I read them slowly, trying to understand how something that had once felt meaningful could now feel so hollow. That's when the anger finally surfaced. Not explosive, not loud, but sharp and focused. It wasn't just that I'd been fired. It was that my ideas had been used without ever being trusted. That my effort had been welcomed, but my voice had not. That I had been valuable only as long as I stayed within the boundaries someone else had set. Once I stepped outside them, I was unnecessary. The realization didn't solve anything, but it shifted something inside me. I stopped applying to jobs for a few days, not because I'd given up, but because I needed to breathe without measuring my worth against acceptance emails. I went for long walks with no destination, let my thoughts wander without forcing conclusions. I paid attention to the things I'd ignored for years, the way my shoulders had been permanently tense, the way silence had once made me uncomfortable. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. I noticed how often companies rejected innovation while publicly praising it, how leaders spoke about growth but resisted anything that threatened their control, how familiar my boss's behavior felt once I stopped personalizing it. He hadn't fired me because I was incompetent. He had fired me because I was inconvenient. That distinction mattered. Still, knowing something logically doesn't erase fear emotionally. Bills continued to arrive. Savings continued to shrink. The pressure didn't disappear, it just changed shape. One morning, staring at my account balance, I felt panic rise so fast it took my breath away. I sat down hard, heart pounding, convinced something irreversible was happening. For the first time, I considered calling my old boss. Not to ask for my job back, but to ask for reassurance, to hear someone tell me I wasn't a mistake. The thought scared me. I realized how close I was to surrendering, not just professionally, but internally. How easy it would be to accept a diminished version of myself if it meant relief from uncertainty. That night, I wrote in a notebook for the first time in years. Not resumes, not cover letters, just thoughts. I wrote about the meeting, the silence, the rejection, the fear. I wrote without censoring myself, letting the frustration spill out without trying to shape it into something productive. When I finished, my hand hurt, but my mind felt clearer. I saw the pattern I'd been trapped in. For years, I had outsourced my sense of direction. I had let titles, approval, and hierarchy define my progress. When that structure disappeared, so did my sense of self. Losing my job hadn't just destabilized my finances. It had exposed how little control I believed I had over my own future. That realization was uncomfortable, but necessary. Because somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the doubt, a quieter question began to form. What if the problem wasn't that I'd been fired? What if the problem was that I'd been building my life inside someone else? limits? I didn't have an answer yet. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than panic. I felt the faint outline of possibility. The heavy oak door of the dining room clicked shut behind me, severing the cacophony of clinking silverware and forced laughter. The sudden silence of the hallway was jarring, ringing in my ears louder than the humiliation my father had just served up alongside the Christmas turkey. I stood there for a moment, my hand still resting on the cold brass knob, listening to the muffled murmur of voices resuming inside. They were already moving on. The Leech had been excised, the party could continue. I didn't storm off. I didn't slam anything. A strange, glacial calm had settled over me, lowering my heart rate and sharpening my vision. It was the same icy focus I used when closing a high-stakes negotiation or navigating a market crash at work. A detachment that allowed me to function while the world burned. I climbed the stairs, the plush carpet muffling my footsteps. The house smelled of roasted sage, pine needles, and the cloying sweetness of Nancy's heavy perfume. A sensory mix that used to trigger nostalgia, but now just induced a low-grade nausea. I reached the landing and turned into my bedroom, or as Nancy liked to call it when guests were over, the spare room Alex occupies. It was a small room, trapped in a time warp of my high school years. Nancy had forbidden me from repainting or buying new furniture, claiming it was a waste of money for someone who wouldn't be staying long. The irony was a bitter pill on my tongue. I walked over to the closet and pulled out my leather weekender bag, the one I used for business trips to Zurich and Tokyo. It looked alien here, a sleek artifact of my real life sitting amidst the particle board furniture and fading posters. I didn't pack everything. I didn't need to. I moved with methodical precision, stripping the room of the things that actually mattered. My laptop, the engine of the career they knew nothing about, went in first. Then came my toiletries, my medication, and the 2 bespoke suits I kept hidden in the back of the wardrobe behind my old winter coats. Nancy always asked why I didn't buy nice clothes instead of the cheap stuff, not realizing the flannel and jeans I wore around the house were a costume designed to make my father feel adequate. I opened the top drawer of the nightstand and hesitated. Inside was a framed photo of my mother, taken a year before she passed. I picked it up, running my thumb over the glass. Leaving this house felt like leaving the last physical tether to her, but looking around the cramped, dusty room, I realized she wasn't here. She hadn't been here for a long time. I wrapped the frame in a t-shirt and tucked it gently into the bag. I zipped the bag shut. The sound was final, like a zipper on a body bag. I took one last look around. I left the old books, the bedding, the sentimental junk. I was leaving the past. I hoisted the strap over my shoulder. The weight felt grounding. Walking back down the stairs felt like descending from a gallows. As I passed the dining room, I heard Nancy's voice, shrill and piercing. "He's just being dramatic, Robert. He'll be back in the kitchen for leftovers in an hour. He has nowhere else to go." I know, my father's voice rumbled, sounding more weary than angry now that the performance was over. "I just had to set a boundary, Nance. You were right. It's time he learns the value of $1. I paused, my hand hovering over the front door latch. The value of $1. The phrase almost made me laugh out loud. I quietly unlocked the deadbolt, twisted the handle, and stepped out into the biting December night. The cold hit me like a physical blow, instantly freezing the moisture in my nostrils. It was snowing, big, soft flakes drifting down in the halo of the streetlights, covering the driveway in a pristine white sheet. The silence out here was different. It was expansive, clean. I walked to my car, a late model sedan that I usually park down the street to avoid Nancy's comments about wasteful spending, though tonight I had parked in the driveway. I threw my bag into the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel. The leather was freezing against my back. I started the engine and the dashboard lit up, a constellation of digital comfort. As the heat began to blast from the vents, I put the car in reverse. I didn't look at the house. I didn't look at the window where the Christmas tree lights twinkled, masking the rot inside. I backed out, shifted into drive, and let the tires crunch over the fresh snow as I accelerated away. I drove aimlessly for the first 10 minutes, the adrenaline finally starting to leak out, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache in my chest. But as the suburban sprawl gave way to the city skyline, the ache began to transform. I wasn't homeless. I wasn't destitute. I was free. I pulled into the circular driveway of the Meridian, a hotel I had put clients up in before. It was expensive, luxurious, and impersonal, exactly what I needed. The valet opened my door before I had even unbuckled. "Good evening, sir. Checking in?" "Yes," I said, my voice sounding raspy. "For the foreseeable future." The lobby was a cavern of marble and gold, smelling of white tea and money. The receptionist didn't look at me with pity or disdain. She looked at my credit card, the heavy black metal one I never showed my father, and gave me a warm, professional smile. "We have a king suite available on the 14th floor with a city view, Mr. Hart. Would that be acceptable?" "That sounds perfect," I said. 10 minutes later, I was standing in a room 3 times the size of my bedroom at home. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city grid, a sprawling nervous system of lights. I dropped my bag on the bench and sat at the mahogany desk. I didn't unpack. I didn't shower. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dim room. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. This was the moment. This was the strike. I logged into my banking portal. The interface loaded, displaying my balances, numbers that would have made my father faint. I navigated to the Transfers and Payments tab. There it was. Recurring transfer. Dad, household. Amount $2,500. Frequency, monthly. First. I clicked Edit, then I clicked Delete. A pop-up window appeared. "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transaction?" I stared at the prompt. For 3 years, that transfer had been the invisible beam holding up the roof of my father's house. It covered the mortgage gap, the groceries Nancy bought at Whole Foods, the gas for her SUV. They thought they were scraping by on his pension and her part-time salary, assuming my rent was just extra pocket money I was begrudgingly handing over. They had no idea it was the foundation of their entire existence. "You called me a leech," I whispered to the empty hotel room. "So I'll stop feeding." I clicked yes. Transaction canceled. I wasn't done. I opened a new tab and pulled up the spreadsheet I kept, the one titled Household Utilities. I went down the list one by one. Electric company. I logged in. The account was in my father's name, but the auto-pay was linked to my American Express. I went to billing options. Remove payment method. The site warned me that without a primary card, the next bill would be mailed. Good. Let them see the paper. Let them see the numbers. Gas and heating. Same process. Remove payment method. Internet and cable. Nancy loved her premium cable package. She watched it all day. I unlinked my card. Streaming services. Netflix, Hulu, HBO. All on my personal email, all paid by me. I didn't just change the payment method. I went into the security settings and hit sign out of all devices. Then I changed the password. The television in the living room back at the house would go black mid-movie. It was petty, perhaps, but they wanted me gone. They wanted my presence erased. I was simply obliging. Finally, I reached the cell phone provider. We were on a family plan I had consolidated years ago to save them money, but I paid the full bill every month to avoid the hassle of collecting their shares. I initiated a transfer of billing responsibility for their 2 lines. It would trigger an email to my father, asking him to assume financial liability for his and Nancy's numbers within 48 hours, or the lines would be suspended. I sat back, the leather chair creaking softly. The silence in the hotel room was absolute. No ticking clock, no furnace rattling, no voices. My phone buzzed on the desk, a text from my father. "Don't be childish. Come back before Nancy locks the deadbolt. We can talk about a payment plan for your rent in the morning." I stared at the words. He still thought he held the cards. He thought he was negotiating with a broke, wayward child who needed a roof. He had no concept that the roof had just been repossessed by reality. I didn't reply. I powered the phone down completely and set it aside. The anger was gone now, replaced by a profound, exhausted hollowness. I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my hand against the cold glass. Below me, the city continued its relentless churn, indifferent to my domestic tragedy. I had done exactly what he asked. I had moved out. I had stopped leeching. I was standing on my own 2 feet. I stripped off my clothes, leaving them in a pile on the floor, and crawled into the massive, starch-white hotel bed. The sheets were cool and smelled of nothing. I pulled the heavy duvet up to my chin and closed my eyes, waiting for sleep to come. For the first time in years, I didn't dread the morning. But as I drifted off, a single terrifying thought lingered in the darkness. God help them when the first bill arrives. The screen of my phone lit up, casting a harsh, bluish glow against the dim interior of my car. It was the 15th of January. Outside, the world was locked in the gray, slushy grip of midwinter, the kind of cold that seeped through the glass and settled into your bones. I had the heater running, the vents blasting warm, dry air against my frozen knuckles, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with the temperature. Dad. The name flashed on the screen, persistent and demanding. It was the 5th time he had called in the last hour. For the first 2 weeks after I walked out on Christmas, there had been silence. I imagined they were celebrating their victory, finally free of the son they claimed was a parasite. I had spent that time in a quiet, sterile corporate housing unit I'd secured through work, unpacking boxes and exhaling for what felt like the first time in 3 years. I had logged into my banking app on December 26th and canceled the standing order, the $2,500 that vanished from my paycheck every month like clockwork. Then, I had methodically gone through the utility accounts, removing my credit card from the heat, the electric, the high-speed internet, and the premium cable package Nancy insisted was a necessity. I watched the phone vibrate against the center console. The buzzing sound was like an angry insect trapped in a jar. I knew why he was calling. The math was simple. The first of the month had come and gone. The grace period for the mortgage usually ended on the 15th. The billing cycles for the utilities would be closing right about now. The ecosystem I had artificially sustained was beginning to starve. I picked up the phone. I didn't say hello. I just pressed the green button and held the device to my ear, listening to the frantic, heavy breathing on the other end. Alex? Alex, are you there? His voice was tight, pitched higher than I was used to. It lacked the booming, authoritative baritone he used when he was lecturing me about my failures. Pick up, damn it. I'm here, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calm, detached. It was the voice of a stranger. Where have you been? The relief in his tone was instantly replaced by aggression. I've been calling you all morning. Do you have any idea what's going on here? I looked out the windshield at the parking lot of my office building. Snow was beginning to fall, dusting the hood of my car. I'm at work, Dad. You know, the job I go to every day. Don't get smart with me. Not today. He paused, and I heard a shuffling sound, like he was moving from room to room, or perhaps closing a door to ensure privacy. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to a harsh whisper. The mortgage payment didn't go through, Alex. I got a notification from the bank. An insufficient funds alert. And the electric company sent a text saying the auto pay failed. Okay, I said. Okay? That's all you have to say? The incredulity was palpable. I went to check the joint account, the one we use for the house bills, and it's empty. It's barely got $200 in it. Where's the transfer? It usually clears on the 1st. I canceled it, I said simply. The silence on the other end was heavy, filled with the static of a poor connection. I could picture him standing in the hallway of that drafty house, wearing his expensive cardigan, clutching the phone with trembling hands. You what? I canceled the transfer, and I removed my card from the utility accounts. I don't live there anymore, remember? You told me to leave. Alex, stop playing games, he snapped, his panic beginning to fray the edges of his anger. This isn't funny. The mortgage is $2,800 a month. The heating bill alone was $400 this month because Nancy likes the house at 72 degrees. I don't have that kind of liquidity right now. I know, I replied. That's why I was paying it. So fix it, he barked, falling back into the old dynamic, the commander ordering the foot soldier. Log in right now and send the money. I'll overlook the late fees this time, but you need to take care of this immediately. Nancy is asking why the internet is acting up, and I can't have her stressing out. I leaned back against the headrest, closing my eyes. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. "Dad, I'm not sending the money. Not today, not next month, never again." "Are you insane?" He sounded breathless now. "We have a mortgage. We have bills. You can't just cut us off." "You called me a leech," I reminded him. My heart rate remained steady, a flat line of resolve. "At Christmas dinner, in front of the family. You stood up, pointed at me, and called me a burden. You said I was mooching off you and Nancy. You told me to get out." "That," he stammered, the wind knocked out of his sails. "Alex, that was... Look, it was Christmas. Tensions were high." "You called me a leech," I repeated, savoring the word. "A leech takes, Dad. A leech drains the host. But that's not what was happening, was it? I was the host. You were the one draining me." I had to say it. The confession exploded out of him, loud and desperate. I opened my eyes. "What?" "I had to," he hissed, his voice dropping even lower, urgent and pathetic. "Nancy. She doesn't know, Alex. She doesn't know about the money. She thinks my pension covers everything. She thinks I'm still consulting on the side. If she knew I needed your money to keep the lights on, to keep this house, God, she'd look at me like I'm nothing." I stared at the dashboard, processing the magnitude of his cowardice. It wasn't just ingratitude, it was a masquerade. He had built a monument to his own ego on the foundation of my paycheck, and to keep the illusion alive, he had agreed with his wife that I was the problem. "So," I said slowly, piecing it together. "When she complained about me living there, about me eating the food or using the water, you just went along with it? You let her believe I was a freeloader so you could pretend to be the big provider?" "It's complicated," he whined. "You don't understand marriage, Alex. I have to maintain a certain standing. She expects a certain lifestyle. When she started going on about you needing to move out, I couldn't defend you without admitting I needed your rent money to pay the bank. I thought if I just made a scene, if I yelled a little, she'd feel better, and we'd just go back to normal the next day. I never thought you'd actually pack your bags." "You humiliated me," I said, the cold truth of it cutting through his excuses. "To save face." "It was a performance," he pleaded. "I was performing for her. I didn't mean it. You're my son. I know you help out. But you have to understand I'm in a corner here. The bank is calling me, Alex. Me. I haven't had a collection call in 30 years. If Nancy finds out the mortgage bounced, if the lights go out, it will destroy me." "It sounds like you have a lot to figure out," I said. "Don't do this," he begged. The anger was gone, replaced by raw fear. "I can't pay this bill. I literally cannot pay it. I have nothing in savings. It all went to the renovations Nancy wanted last summer. I was counting on your check. I need you to come home. Just come home, bring your stuff back. We'll tell Nancy you apologized and everything can go back to how it was." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that scratched my throat. "You want me to come back and apologize? After you kicked me out? You want me to apologize for the privilege of paying your bills so you can pretend to be rich?" "I'm asking you to help your father," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I raised you. I put a roof over your head. And I paid for that roof for the last 3 years," I countered, my voice hardening. "I paid for the food. I paid for the heat. I paid for Nancy's cable so she could watch her shows and ignore me. I paid $2,500 a month for a single bedroom in a house where I wasn't welcome." "Alex, please." He was sobbing now, or close to it. It was a terrifying sound, the sound of a man whose reality is shattering in real time. "The notification says I have 5 days before they report it to the credit bureaus. 5 days. Just send the money for this month. Just January. Give me time to figure something out." I looked at the clock on the dashboard. 5:45 p.m. The sun had set. The streetlights were flickering on, illuminating the falling snow. "No," I said. "Alex, you have a house you can't afford, Dad. You have a wife who despises me and respects you only because of a lie you told her. You created this situation, every single part of it." "She'll leave me," he whispered. The terror in his voice was absolute. "If the money runs dry, she'll leave me." "Then maybe she should," I said. "Or maybe you should tell her the truth. Tell her you're broke. Tell her the leech was the only thing keeping the wolves away." "I can't," he wept. "I can't do that. That's not my problem anymore." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could still hear his tiny, tinny voice screaming my name, a frantic, incoherent stream of begging and bargaining. "Alex, wait! Alex, listen to me. Son, please." I pressed the red icon. The call ended. The silence that rushed back into the car was profound. It wasn't empty, it was heavy with finality. I sat there for a long time, watching the snowflakes melt against the warm glass of the windshield. I waited for the guilt to hit me. I waited for that familiar, crushing sense of obligation that had ruled my life for so long, the feeling that I was responsible for his happiness, for his stability. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange vibration in my chest. It was a mixture of grief and adrenaline. I grieved for the father I wished I had, the one who would have protected me instead of sacrificing me to his wife's vanity. But underneath the grief, there was relief. The bill had come due. For years, I had been intercepting the invoice, paying the cost of his pride with my own dignity and labor. But not today. My phone lit up again. Dad. I stared at it for a moment, watching the pixels dance. Then I reached over, opened the settings menu, and blocked the number. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the parking spot. The road ahead was dark and slick with ice, but I had new tires. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I was going. The vibration of the phone against the hardwood floor sounded like a trapped insect, a buzzing, desperate drone that echoed through the empty expanse of my new living room. I didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, I took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the dark, bitter warmth as it slid down my throat, contrasting sharply with the chill of the January morning pressing against the sliding glass door. My new apartment smelled of fresh latex paint and lemon oil. There was no scent of Nancy's overpowering potpourri, no lingering odor of my father's cigars, and most importantly, no heavy, suffocating air of resentment. Just clean, silent space. The phone stopped, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Then 3 seconds later, it started again. I set my mug down on a coaster, on my table, and picked up the device. Dad flashed on the screen. It was the 5th time he'd called since the sun came up. I swiped the green icon, not out of obedience, but out of a need to sever the final tendon holding us together. I put the phone to my ear but didn't speak. "Alex? Alex, are you there?" His voice was ragged, stripped of the booming baritone he usually used to command a room. It sounded thin, reeking of fear. "Please, don't hang up." "I'm here," I said. My voice was calm, frighteningly so. I felt like I was speaking from underwater, watching the surface ripple above me. "Did you get my messages?" he asked, the words tumbling over each other. "The bank sent another notice. A foreclosure warning, Alex. They were saying if we didn't pay the arrears and the current month by the 1st, they're starting the process. Nancy is... God, Alex, she's hysterical. She's throwing things. I can't handle her when she's like this." I walked over to the window. From the 4th floor, the city traffic looked like a stream of toy cars. "That sounds stressful, Dad." "Stressful? It's a disaster." He let out a harsh, incredulous laugh that turned into a cough. "Look, son, I know I messed up. I know the things I said at Christmas were harsh, but you have to understand the pressure I was under. Nancy expects a certain standard. I was just trying to keep the peace. I didn't mean it. You know I didn't mean it." "You called me a leech," I reminded him softly. "You told the entire family that I was draining you dry. You told me to get out." "It was a performance," he pleaded. "I told you that. I was just trying to get her off my back about the grocery bills. I never thought you'd actually leave. I never thought you'd cut the transfer. Alex, please, I need the money, just for a few months, just until I can figure something out. Come home. We can fix up the basement properly this time. I'll make Nancy lay off." I closed my eyes, visualizing the kitchen table back at the house. I could see the pile of unpaid bills he was likely staring at, the red ink, the sheer mathematical impossibility of his lifestyle without my 80% contribution. "I can't do that, Dad." "What do you mean you can't?" His voice hardened, a flash of the old anger trying to spark, but it was quickly dampened by desperation. You have the money. I know what you make. You sitting on a fortune while your father is about to be thrown onto the street. It's not a fortune, I said, turning away from the window to look at my unpacked boxes. It's my salary. And for the first time in 5 years, it's actually going into my own life. I just signed a lease, Dad. A year-long lease. There was a long silence on the other end, heavy with the realization of consequences. You signed a lease? He whispered. Yes. I have rent of my own to pay now. Real rent. Not the extortion fees you charged me to live in a room with no heat. So that's it? You're just going to let us drown? I'm not holding your head under the water, I said, feeling a strange, sad clarity. I just stopped swimming for both of us. You're the one who demanded I let go. Nancy will leave me, he choked out. The admission hung in the air, pathetic and raw. If the house goes, she goes. She won't live in an apartment, Alex. She won't do it. The old Alex, the one who spent his 20s desperately trying to buy his father's approval, would have capitulated right there. I would have transferred the funds, apologized for existing, and moved back into the shadows to keep his marriage intact. But that Alex had walked out into the snow on Christmas Eve and hadn't come back. If she leaves you because you cannot buy her a lifestyle you cannot afford, I said slowly, then she never loved you, Dad. And if you need my money to keep her, you don't have a marriage. You have a transaction. You ungrateful little... He cut himself off, breathing heavily. I'm not ungrateful, I said. I'm done. I wish you luck with the sale, Dad. The market is good right now. If you list it fast, you might get out before the bank takes it. You'll have enough equity to get a small condo. It won't be the mansion Nancy wants, but it'll be a roof. Alex, wait. Goodbye, Dad. I ended the call. My thumb hovered over the block contact button. I hesitated for a moment, feeling the phantom weight of familial obligation, the biological imperative to protect the pack. But the pack had bitten me. I pressed the button. The silence that rushed back into the room was absolute. It wasn't the lonely silence I had feared. It was the silence of a heavy burden finally being set down. 3 weeks later, the reality of their situation manifested in a Zillow notification on my laptop. I hadn't sought it out, but the algorithm knew. I clicked the link, and there it was. The house. 42 Oakwood Drive. The photos were professional, wide-angle shots that made the rooms look brighter and larger than they ever were in reality. They had staged it. The clutter was gone. Nancy's collection of porcelain dolls had been swept away, but I could still see the ghosts. I zoomed in on the photo of the dining room. That was the table where it happened. In the glossy image, it was set with placemats and wine glasses, inviting and warm. In my memory, it was a battlefield where I was publicly eviscerated while chewing on dry turkey. I scrolled down to the listing description. Motivated sellers. Price to move. Those words were the tombstone of my father's pride. Motivated sellers was real estate code for desperation. They were trying to outrun the foreclosure clock. I did the math in my head. Without my $4,000 a month, they hadn't just missed the mortgage. They had missed the car payments, the insurance, the credit cards. The house of cards had collapsed the moment the wind stopped blowing. I closed the laptop and stood up, needing to move. I walked into my kitchen, my sleek, modern kitchen with granite countertops I had chosen, not settled for. I opened the fridge. It was full. Fresh vegetables, expensive cheeses, a bottle of craft beer. For years, I had eaten peanut butter sandwiches in my car because I couldn't afford lunch after paying my father's rent. I had worn shoes with holes in the soles because Nancy needed a new handbag. I looked at the abundance in front of me and felt a sudden, sharp pang of grief. Not for the house, or for them, but for the time I had lost. I mourned the years I spent lighting myself on fire to keep them warm, only for them to complain about the smoke. I grabbed the beer and walked out onto the small balcony. The winter air was crisp, biting at my cheeks. Below, the city was alive, a grid of lights and motion. I wondered where they would go. A rental in the next town over? A small apartment? I wondered if Nancy had already packed her bags, or if she was currently screaming at Robert amidst the cardboard boxes, blaming him for the ruin of her social standing. The thought should have brought me pleasure, a sense of karmic justice. But it didn't. It just felt hollow. Their suffering didn't fix my past, but my absence had certainly secured my future. I took a sip of the beer, leaning against the railing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from a friend asking if I wanted to grab dinner on Friday. A real dinner, somewhere nice. I typed back, absolutely. I looked back inside through the glass door. My apartment was warm, lit by the soft glow of a floor lamp. It was small compared to the house on Oakwood Drive, but it was mine. Every inch of it was paid for with money I had earned and kept. There were no shouts echoing off the walls, no walking on eggshells, no debt collectors calling the landline. The Leech had detached itself. And contrary to my father's prediction, the host was the one dying, while the Leech was finally truly learning how to breathe. I turned back to the city lights, took a deep breath of the freezing air, and let it out slowly, watching the white puff of vapor rise and disappear into the night. It was over. The check was canceled. The account was closed. For the first time in my life, the balance was positive.